This concept of duty begins the moment a young person becomes a cadet. Plebes enter towards the end of June, usually a class of about 1,100 young people from all over the United States. They go through, as Steve said, a period of basic training called Beast Barracks. Beast Barracks is under the command of the seniors, the first class of cadets. It's a tough time. It's a whittling them from civilian life to military life in just a few short months. They're allowed to have 4 responses in all their interactions with the upper class. Yes, sir. No, sir. No excuse, sir. Sir, I do not understand. And that's pretty much it. The yearlings, who are sophomores, are involved in military training at the academy for their summer. Again, led by the seniors in first class. The junior class goes out into military posts all around the world, getting a hands-on first experience in real military life. And then the senior class, again, remains at West Point to be instructors for these younger people. From the very beginning, the West Point experience is one of being assigned responsibility. Not just in things like making your bed properly, but taking assigned tasks that impact life in the mess hall, on the athletic fields, and in the classroom. Older cadets are placed in positions of responsibility which demand more of them as they demand more of the cadets who come after them. Training in leadership begins early and increases with time. The concept of honor distinguishes the West Pointer, partly because of the honor code that says a cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. The honor code makes toleration an honor offense equivalent to committing the offense. In other words, turning a blind eye to the offense is totally unacceptable. A high standard like this is very difficult for young people coming into West Point to accept, particularly since they're coming from a culture that says you don't rat on your friend. But with formal instruction on ethics and honor, the cadets seem to rise to that high standard that is to be carried into officership. Virginia and I were in Oxford, England several years ago in summer, and somebody shouted from across the street, "Hey, Chaplain!" A young man came running over. I didn't recognize him as a cadet who had graduated the year before because he was a Turkish cadet. Each year, about 12 cadets come from allied countries to join the Corps of Cadets for their 4-year experience. This young man was from Turkey. We spoke about his experiences in the Turkish army as an officer. And he said, "Oh, Chaplain, it's not the same. There's not the honor, there's not the integrity that I've learned as part of officership. I wish I could be in the United States Army." Part of my assignment at West Point was the realization that this was a secular academy. Her mission was unique in that she was training young leaders for the military profession, people who would be called out to fight our nation's wars. This was the starting place for young people who would actually be called on to die for their country. What was the role of faith, of belief in God, in preparing leaders of character who would lead our military, who would go to war? It became apparent to me that faith expression, religious traditions, were encouraged at the academy. Mandatory chapel had ceased the year before I got there. And yet, there was a lot of chapel attendance in all the post chapels. Officers set the example, and there was a good climate for a person who wanted to serve God in this place, even though it was a secular college, secular academy, to serve the Lord. Reality was, however, that only 30 to 40% of cadets were involved in any kind of religious activity. 90% of those who came in as plebes indicated some religious denominational tie. But in reality, many of them didn't have any kind of formal religious expression at the academy. And so I was facing this dilemma. We say we're training young people to be leaders of character. Our motto is duty, honor, country. What place does faith have? Or how can this be done if faith is not offered to all cadets? There were the hardcore cadets who were dynamic in their faith, whether it was Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. And then there was that great wave of people who came from good homes, where parents perhaps attended religious worship, and so these came periodically to chapel. But many cadets had no tie to religious activity. How was it then that we would deal with faith issues with all members of the Corps? It was certain that we couldn't mandate spirituality. Compulsory chapel attendance had ceased. No one could be forced to believe in God. The academy must not be in the business of telling cadets that they had to be religious. And always hanging over our heads was this idea of the separation of church and state. The government provided chaplains for West Point. Mandatory chapel had existed for 150 years. Federal funds were designated to support the religious program at the academy. If there were questions or criticism about this, that was settled in Washington. But there were other issues that we were constantly wrestling with in terms of church and state. For instance, I would go into the mess hall, and it seats 4,000 cadets for meals, and there's an elevated place called the poop deck where they are called to attention before meals. And one day a week I would give a prayer. The leading cadet would say, give your attention to the chaplain. And then it was 30 to 40 seconds. I usually took a little part of a psalm, something to acknowledge God. It wasn't a long prayer, and it would not offend Protestants, Catholics, or Jews, or anybody. One day, 3 senior cadets came into my office. The chaplain, we want you to stop giving prayers in the mess hall. I said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, that's a mandatory formation for us. We have to be there. And you're giving a prayer makes that a mandatory religious service. So we'd like you to stop. Well, I waited a couple months. They graduated, and the next year I started it again. It was probably 2 or 3 days later, the same thing happened. Cadets came in, said, chaplain. And I learned later that they were discussing this in law class. So the whole senior class was aware that the chaplain wasn't really supposed to be leading prayers in the mess hall.